Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. This week on the Sweetwater Minute, we are proud to welcome Telefunken Elektroakustiks to Sweetwater, and we have Alan Veniscofsky, the Director of Operations, here with us.
Yes, how you doing, Mitch?
Great, thanks for coming in. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
You were here doing training with our sales engineers this morning.
Yes, this morning.
Yeah, introducing the mics, and actually I played on a session for you here, and they were listening to the mics with a whole band.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
Great guitar player.
Oh, thank you. I was fishing for that compliment.
Excellent.
So really cool microphones,
Yeah.
and a long heritage to the Telefunken name. Can you tell us something about where the company came from to get to the point where it is now?
Yeah, it's a long story, but I'll keep it quick.
Okay.
Telefunken started in 1903 in Germany, and really was a company at the forefront of broadcast and communication technology. The history of Telefunken can be drawn back directly to the birth of things like radio antenna towers, shortwave radio, vacuum tubes, and microphone technology. So in 1903, the company is born. The fun fact about Telefunken is the literal translation for Telefunken, tele from the Latin word tele, means distant, and funken means spark. So the literal translation of Telefunken is a distant spark, possibly the precursor of the term wireless communication or distant communication. So in the 1930s and 40s, things changed for Telefunken. They started to produce professional audio products like microphones, vacuum tube-based microphones.
Right.
And at one point in the 50s and the 60s, they really created some flagship items. Behind me right now, you can see the Elam 251, the C12, and the U47. Those were the most premium tube microphones from the 50s and the 60s that commanded the most money and the most desire during the vintage mic boom, which was in the 90s.
Right.
So enter into the year 2000, we step into the picture and as Telefunken Elektroakustik here in the USA, and we start to recreate these classic microphones, starting with some of the broken switches and the capsules, and that leads to our product line. So these are our flagship pieces, recreations of the original Telefunken. From there, we came up with the RFT line, which are more affordable versions of the microphones, the AR51, the AK47, the CU29 Copperhead, and the Elam 260, all pulling heavily from their classic older brother counterparts. Same transformers, same vacuum tubes, same components. But just more affordable metalwork and accessories.
Sure.
And then as of more recently, we have our Dynamic Series microphone. This is the M82 and the M80, excellent for stage and studio application. So M80 is great for vocals and snare, M82 for kick drum and broadcast, and then the M81 for instruments.
Right.
So we have three tiers: the Diamond Series, the RFT Series, and the Dynamic Series now in the current Telefunken Elektroakustik product line.
Right. It's an amazing array of mics.
Yeah.
And you guys have really taken it and run with it and created some amazing things.
Yeah.
These are just beautiful. So we've all heard these model numbers, the 251, the U47, the C12, but many of us haven't had a chance to really sit down and work with the vintage models or these new ones. Can you give us a brief description of how these three mics sound?
Sure. Well, they all have a unique voice, while some microphones actually share some of the same components. The 251 tends to be very natural sounding with a really big low end buildup that you can work the proximity effect on. It's ideal for vocals, acoustic guitar, room mics. It kind of has, if you were to draw an EQ curve, it has a little bit of a built-in smiley EQ curve to it. Its closest brother is the C12, where it uses the same capsule, the same transformer, and the same vacuum tube. Sonically, this microphone is much flatter, and it actually has 9 polar patterns, so it's the most versatile out of all three in senses of using it as a recording tool.
Okay.
So these two microphones are very natural. They use like the Austrian sound, the CK12 capsule, and then the U47 over your head is a little bit more colored. That's the German sound. It has a different capsule that kind of almost has a reverse smiley face EQ. It's very mid-range focused. It has a steel-based vacuum tube and a large format transformer, resulting in a very rich and very colored tone, where these are more natural and kind of clear sounding.
So. Right. So with these microphones, you're recreating the vintage models. What did you base that on? Did you go and find a vintage model, or how did you arrive at the sound that you were going to be working with?
Thanks for asking that. Actually, each microphone has a different story. The 251 was the first mic we reverse engineered, and we were able to work closely with a recording studio in California, a very famous one, and we got our hands on Joni Mitchell's famous 251.
Nice.
So we used that as a blueprint to reverse engineer. And of course, the tolerances in the 50s and the 60s were a little bit wider. So we found a variety of sounds from the original mics. We just honed them into what we thought was the best one and kind of settled on that. Same with the C12. At one point, about 10 years ago, we received a package from the original AKG, and they had handed us over the blueprints and the documents that we needed to kind of keep rolling with this project.
Wow.
So it wasn't a direct, here you go for it, but it was, here's our blessing to try to keep doing this. And then with the U47, that was simply reverse engineering a handful of ones that we got our hands on. There were many more U47s originally produced than the 251 and the C12, so it was easier to grab one from Europe, one from Nashville, one from Miami, one from LA, kind of benchmark them all and figure out where they sat. So it was several years in reverse engineering to try to pull that all together. But we think we've nailed it. And now we're making these microphones, in my opinion, better than they ever were because we're using better metal, better plastics, tighter tolerances, and just better, modern components.
Right. So one of the things with a vintage mic is that for years it's been in the studio, it's got dust on the capsule, maybe smoke, whatever the vocalists have been doing with it or whatever's been put on. Did you recreate the sound of an old microphone, or did you recreate the sound of a new microphone the way that it was made?
Both. Good question. We were lucky enough to get our hands on some new old stock components, which means originally developed 40 or 50 years ago, still in their factory containers. So in the case of the 251, Joni Mitchell obviously heavily used that mic along with all the Laurel Canyon type guys, so there was plenty of smoke being blown around there. But what we did is we decided to just basically use that as a benchmark and then compare it to a new old stock one right out of the gate. And we did that through all three of these microphones. So technically, to answer your question, when you buy one of our microphones, it should sound exactly like it did when it was brand new 60 years ago. We don't want it to sound like it's old or used. We want it to have the fidelity quality of a vintage product, but still, be new sounding.
Right. So how does that translate down to the RFT series?
The RFT series then uses the key components of each of these microphones, the transformers, the vacuum tubes, the resistors and the capacitors, and sets them up in a similar manner. So the AR51, the circuit flow is similar to the 251, although we use a slightly different capsule. The Copperhead, the CU29, has a similar circuit flow to the C12, although we use a different transformer for that product. And the AK47 uses the same resistors, same capacitors, same transformer, in a slightly different vacuum tube.
Okay.
So the RFT is designed to sound like a new modern microphone, but with all of the kind of nuances of the classic microphones shown here. Right.
I think sometimes when we hear about all these tube microphones, it sounds so wonderful. They're based around tubes.
Yes.
And sometimes there are questions about tubes. Do you guys have a lot of tubes? Are you set up to be able to provide those kind of things?
Yes. We have a massive collection of historic vacuum tubes, tubes that we purchased from Europe, and South America that were, originally produced in the 60s through the 80s. And those vacuum tubes are the heart and soul of the new microphones that we build. We would never put a new vacuum tube in one of our new mics. We always have to go back to the original, either General Electric or RFT or Telefunken branded tubes. So we do have a huge collection of leftovers. If anyone has a bad tube in our microphone, we got you covered.
Sure.
Big time.
And you have plenty to keep making microphones for years to come.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. Wonderful. So now the new dynamic range. Where did this come from?
The dynamic range came from, our customers are asking us, hey, well, can you make something that sounds better than what I'm already using on stage right now? Can you make a better kick drum mic for us? And it was just meeting demands of our customers and our dealers. The first product we came out with was the M80. It's a very bright dynamic. It goes head-to-head versus a lot of condensers, as well as pretty much crushes most of the dynamics that are out there. It's voiced for vocal and snare drum application, so it has a tight cardioid pattern, which means you can get a lot more gain from your monitors before you feedback on stage. And then same on drums, you can get a lot more snare drum, you get a lot less hi-hat or cymbal bleed in your snare track because of that. So that was the M80. The M81 followed a few years later, which has the same exact structure and actually the same exact capsule and the same transformer, but there's a filter network built into it to flatten it out. Okay. So it has a flatter top end and extended low end, making it better on bright signal sources. It's great on horns, trombone, great on a bright Telecaster, excellent on timbali or kunga, and certainly great on toms.
Right.
And then the last microphone in the Dynamic series recently released is the M82, which is a large diaphragm dynamic designed for kick drum and broadcast applications. That has two passive filters on it that will allow for 4 unique voices: kick drum, broadcast vocal, instrument, and horn.
Right.
So,
right.
And that's the Dynamic series, those 3 microphones.
Nice, nice. And I just want to clarify, you mentioned that the M80 is a bright dynamic. I'm assuming what you mean is that it's bright for a dynamic. It's not a really bright microphone. It just has that top end like a condenser would have.
It's bright for a dynamic.
Right. So we were using it on vocals last night at a rehearsal, and it sounds great. It has all that clarity and that articulation. You can really understand, what the singer is saying. It really brings that out nicely. Yeah,
we intentionally carved some of the low mud out of that, and then it's matched with a really high quality output transformer that allows it to have a wide frequency response and be just very smooth on most sources. So.
All right. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Alan, thanks for coming in.
Thanks, man.
Appreciate the tour of the, I'll take your hand.
Yeah.
Appreciate the tour of all the 3 lines of microphones. We're so excited to have them here at Sweetwater. We want to welcome you. We're honored to have the Telefunken brand here.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Sweetwater.
Absolutely.
So, right on.
Absolutely. I'm Mitch Gallagher. Thanks for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute.